Hi, I'm Tanya Adams, brain-based coach for women entrepreneurs and the founder of the Freedom Collective. Welcome back to my channel today. There's this movie called The Yes Man. I think it's got Jim Carrey in it, I'm not sure. And in the principle in the movie is that he just says yes to everything. And it's a humorous take on what happens when you say yes to everything, though the reality is, if you're going to say yes to everything in business and in fact in life, if you're going to be that yes person, there's a cost. And very often that cost is not just to your mental well-being, it can be a real financial cost. And I'm going to share with you today the story of a client that I worked with who discovered the actual cash cost to her of not saying no when she should have said no. And this is her story is in fact pretty much a textbook case of what people pleasing and unboundary behavior in an entrepreneurial business starts to look like. So stay tuned and listen to her story, because I think you might find yourself in the story. So this is her story, and if you're an entrepreneur or you're in business, or maybe you're just ambitious in a career, you may even be her right now. She was the person who, when a client reached out and said, "Hey, can you do this extra thing for me after hours?" she said yes. When the message came through saying, "Can we do a quick meeting on the weekend? It's only going to take an hour or two," she absolutely unhesitatingly said yes. She had bought into the narrative that if you want to have your own business, you've got to say yes to everything, and that client service came first. And she, like all of us, was 100% committed to her client's well-being, though over time, what started out as customer service started to feel a lot like customer servitude. And she felt more like she had 100 bosses than that she was the boss with 100 different clients. And by the time she came to me, actually, she was literally on the verge of burnout. And statistically, almost 35% of entrepreneurs suffer either symptoms of burnout or, in fact, full-blown burnout. I've worked with clients who have lost their entire business through burnout, and it's taken years of recovery. And it's not just the mental health issues that surround this idea of sacrificing and sacrificing. In fact, the hustle culture is exactly that. The hustle culture demands of us that we sacrifice everything in service of our business. And the problem is not limited to just the mental health issues. In her case, she was a textbook example of this, because the issue goes beyond that. Not saying no to things and saying yes all the time starts to, in fact, erode the very fabric of the value of what you are wanting to offer to your clients. You start to find that you don't have time to think creatively. The quality of your product, the value that you're adding starts to diminish. Projects get rushed, or they're delivered at the last minute. And suddenly the shine and polish of what you believe you are there for, the passion that you brought to the business, is no longer there anymore because you've run out of energy. She could see that the more she was driving herself and the less self-care she was giving, the quality of her work was deteriorating. She also didn't have time to take on clients that she liked. And in fact, along with her energy and her mental health deteriorating, her bank balance was going backwards. This all despite the fact that it felt like she was working more hours than ever before. She had less money in her bank account. And so she had to make a change. And this is the interesting thing about starting to say no and set boundaries, is that the fact that we don't do that is usually driven by a fear of rejection, a fear of not being liked, a fear of being I get this from entrepreneurs a lot, a fear of being ungrateful for the business. Here's an opportunity, somebody's offered you a project, and you turn around and say no. And what will the universe say when you are ungrateful? And so in her case, she started small, which I recommend to people, is start somewhere, though she was quite half-hearted about it. So she would sort of say no to some meetings on the weekend. She would not consistently have meetings in the evenings. In terms of her pricing, she'd be kind of vague about her pricing or non-committal and offer maybe smaller discounts. They're still not coming across as confident about her pricing. And at the end of the day, what would start to happen is the cycle would continue to repeat. She would just feel that the emotional energy of holding these spaces, of saying no, of dealing with the pushback, there was always pushback, was too much. And she would default ultimately back to her people pleasing tendencies and find herself back where she started with all the best intentions of having boundaries, and yet nothing seemed to be moving forward. Her big wake up call came when one of her most demanding clients that she had really extended herself for reached out to her to ask her for an extra project, an extra piece on a project that hadn't previously been agreed to. And she was back into her old ways of not saying no, being the yes girl. So she said yes and hastily put the pieces together, delivered the project on time, though it was subpar quality. She didn't have the mental and creative resources to get it done well, and she also didn't have enough time. What happened? Predictably, the client saw the quality of the work and freaked. Here she was sitting in front of the client that she had done the most work for over the years, that she had extended herself more than once, far beyond the agreements that they had. And here was the client, angry, frustrated, and accusing her of doing subpar work. And it was in that moment that she knew that if something didn't change, she wasn't going to make it through. And so together we worked out a plan and a plan of action where she was able to, in a manageable way, start to roll out step by step ways to start communicating exactly what her needs were and what boundaries were. You see, the thing to remember is that boundaries exist already. And this is what she had learned on her journey, is that although she was saying yes to things, it didn't change the fact that there were already boundaries in place. Boundaries are nothing more than existing limits, and they exist whether or not we state them, whether we communicate them, whether we allow transgressions of those boundaries, or whether we ourselves transgress our own boundaries, they will exist. We have a finite amount of time, we have a finite amount of energy, and ignoring those boundaries, which is really what happens. People have this language of setting boundaries or creating boundaries. The boundaries are there. What happens is either we ignore them or somebody else ignores them, or we give permission for other people to ignore them. And so the first step that we put together was to start by saying, these are my working hours. Now, you might be listening to this and going, working hours? I work from home. I work when there's work. And absolutely, that's been your reality. And what has the cost been? So the first step that she did was she put in place working hours. She marked it in her diary. She used tech to do that. And she started to communicate with her clients that her office hours were 9 to 5. Setting working hours seemed radical. And given that she was used to the adrenaline and the cortisol running her and this kind of always on scenario, it felt really scary to do that. So the next step she had to put in place was to manage responses to emails and responses to WhatsApps and instant messages. And she blocked off certain times in the day that were dedicated to those. It again took a mindset shift to let herself not respond immediately to every incoming message. It did require in the beginning that her telephone was not near her while she was doing focused work, and that her email client was shut down if she was doing focus work on her laptop, and her notifications all got switched off. In the beginning, this caused her quite a lot of anxiety because, again, she was fueled originally by the cortisol and the adrenaline of the so called emergency response mode that she was always in. What she discovered, however, was utilizing the advantages of tech where she could switch off the notifications, diary block certain times, and give herself permission to fully step into those response modes. She started to notice that there was a whole lot of time available in the day, more time available than she'd had before to focus on deep work, to focus on client value work, that she would be able to deliver high quality output to her clients. And over time, what she was able to do was rewire her brain out of the cortisol adrenaline response of emergency responding to every single notification and quiet her central nervous system down so that she was able to go into what's known psychologically as flow state. And when she was in flow state, she started to see that the speed with which she would get work done was far higher than it was when she was in when half her brain was waiting for those messages and those notifications. And so it turned out for her that over time, that anxiety response around what's happening, are there emails, what's going on my phone, started to quiet down the more that she was able to reallocate that time effectively and use the tech that we have, use the technology. She used the technology that she had available to her to manage that. The last step, and probably the biggest hurdle for her, was to learn how to say no to projects or additional offerings inside existing projects that just didn't fit with her values. And this is, in my experience, the biggest hotspot for most entrepreneurs is how do I say no to incoming billable work? Because this is my bread and butter. And the first few times she said no to either clients who were not aligned with her values. So she had clients who didn't value her as a person or as a professional, and their value set in their own businesses was not aligned with what she was doing. So she had to say no to those. And then there was people and there was projects that she needed to say no to. Saying no to the clients themselves was tough because occasionally that meant that the whole client would go away. They didn't like working within her rules. They were not aligned with the way that she did work. And her values and the client's values didn't line up. And occasionally those clients would leave. Some of the clients adjusted. There were clients who left, which again prompted an anxious response in her initially to say, well, you see, if I had just said yes all the time, I would still have the clients. Though what she started to see, which was remarkable, was that every time she said no to a misaligned client or a misaligned project, it allowed space for new kinds of clients to come into her world. And she started to draw to her opportunities and clients who were aligned with the way she worked because they also wanted a service provider that was aligned with their values. And this started to be such an aha for her that it helped her to grow her confidence and rewire her thinking around the importance and power of saying no to what's not aligned with your values and saying yes. And she realized that saying yes to the things that are aligned with her values created a virtuous upward cycle where the more she said yes to the aligned clients and the more she said no to the non-aligned clients and projects, the more of the alignment came into place. It seemed almost magically to self-feed itself with the exact clients and the exact projects that were aligned with who she was and really why she started her business in the first place, full of passion and enthusiasm. To support this, she actually sat down with her journals. It's something I recommend with my clients is journal your process, be part of your own learning and development. And she made contracts and agreements with herself. And that's an important part of rewiring your brain. Our brains really enjoy it when we tick off a box or do the thing that we said we would do. And so, how we can initiate that is to start by saying, this is what I'm going to do, make the commitment. And as she did that process and would journal exactly what her own boundaries were, which always existed, she was just ignoring them before, the more that she called them out loud and the more that she affirmed them to herself. And this is the real underlying bedrock of all of it, is that she started to value her own time and herself more than she ever had before. And the whole value set shifted from their needs are more important than mine, they are more important than me, to I am the most important thing here because I am the value bringer, I am the value giver. And actually, at the end of the day, this is my life and it's my gift to bring. And so it set up again another virtuous cycle where she was able to tick off in her journaling every time she honored a boundary that already existed and she stopped ignoring it. Now, why is this an important thing to do in your own brain? Every time you ignore a boundary that is real for you, it sets up a set of neurochemicals that are there to remind you that you have done this. And if you continue to ignore your own boundaries and allow yourself or others to transgress them, what sets up is a cycle of self-mistrust. When we have a cycle of self-mistrust that grows, what that also means is that our self-belief is eroded. If you think about this from a client-facing perspective or a client delivery perspective, clients, all human beings, are alert to what's not being said as much as they are to what is being said. If you have a habit of not doing the things that are right and aligned with you, it starts to create internal energetic noise inside you, which is going to come across to your clients when you're sharing or pitching your offer or working with them in meetings. They can feel the misalignment inside you. Very often a client will interpret this as a misalignment between you and them, which it may not be. What they're picking up is your own internal misalignment with your own value set. And this starts to negatively impact the way in which you come across to your clients. So it's so critical for you to set up a process and a belief system of self-trust in yourself where you internally know that you will always do what's right for your value set. And then what starts to get translated to your clients without you ever having to say it is that they start to trust that you will always do what's right for their value set where you've agreed to that. And the trust relationship between you and your client starts to grow. And she started to find this, that the more that she opened up space for herself to now have hobbies and to say no to things that encroached on that, the more that she became whole in herself, the more her relationships with her clients improved. She also had interesting stories to tell, which meant she wasn't only just ever talking to her clients about boring business stuff, in inverted commas. It wasn't all just business. She was able to create relationships that had multiple different layers of contact points. And this is so critical in business. People buy from people they know, like, and trust. And that likability factor is a lot deeper than just you're a nice person to greet and have coffee with. Likability comes from recognizing ourselves in somebody else and having other points of commonality, not just the fact that we're in business together. And this really blossomed for her the more that she was able to have pieces of her life that were uniquely hers and that she could learn in different ways, and that it added color and flavor to her work with her clients. Over time, of course, because she was showing up differently, she was able to bill the right rates. She stopped unreasonably discounting her rates. She grew confident in the fact that her rates were pitched at the right place for the clients and for what she had on offer. And of course, her bank balance grew. So she found that she was becoming richer. And it wasn't just a financial wealth that was growing. Her life became far richer. She was able to have varied experiences, have different things happening in her day and in her life, and her bank balance started to grow as a result of that as well. The quality of work improved. So when it came time to either put up her rates or to charge a higher rate for a different kind of work, because she was growing in all these different fields and expanding herself as a human and growing in her creativity, she was able to bill more for the same amount of hours. It was no longer about the hours that she was working. It became about the value she was giving to her clients. And her clients were more than happy to pay because they were seeing and experiencing the value back into their own businesses of that increased richness of who she was as a person and as a service provider in her field. And this story is not unique. I work with entrepreneurs all the time, and this story comes up more and more and more. It is part of what we are sold when we're sold, and the internet's full of it, social media is full of it, is this idea that we've got to sacrifice everything. And I'm sure you can think of any number of podcast speakers or public figures who will tell you that you have to sacrifice everything for the success that you want as an entrepreneur. And it's simply not true. It's absolutely not true. The more that you are able to set boundaries and hold that space and give yourself what you need, the better able you are to meet your clients' needs. And of course, this is not an exact science. There are going to be times where a project has to take place at night, or there is a project deadline that you are choosing to work for a couple of days extra. That's a very different come from space than perpetually being on this treadmill of saying yes to everything. The difference is that you are making that choice and you've allocated and shifted your energy around and your priorities around to accommodate that anomaly. And so, of course, entrepreneurship has ebbs and flows, and there's pressure points and lower pressure points. It's really about the difference between choosing that for yourself than being on autopilot and running to avoid rejection or coming from a space of scarcity and fear. So, how can you start to translate this into your business? Well, the first thing to do is to sit down and write down what you need. What are your needs? Until you've really identified what you need, this process is impossible. Many entrepreneurs have become so disconnected from what they need that it's impossible in the beginning, or really, really challenging, to sit down and go, what do I actually need? We've become habituated to work. That's what I do. When people phone, so how was your day? What have you got planned for today? I'm working. What do you, and on weekends, what are you thinking? What plans have you got for the weekend? Very often it's, oh, I've got to finish off the admin for this, so I've got to tidy up that. So I would say the first step is to take a step back and go, well, what do I need? What do I need? And just give yourself 20, 30 minutes sitting with a journal and ask, if I were free, and I was allowed to say what I need to make my life feel joy, abundant, and free, what would I need in my life, in theory? And the second step is to list what's important to you. What are your values? Maybe it's your marriage. Maybe that's a no-go area. Maybe it's parenting. Maybe it's your exercise. Maybe it's your diet. Maybe it's the degree that you're studying. Write a list of your highest value items aside from work. And be wary if what pops up in that moment is making money. Making money, in truth, is a side effect of doing all of this work. It isn't the main value. That I don't know any very successful entrepreneur who will say to you that the main value he has or she has for their business is money. So what are your values? And write them down, and you'll notice when you're writing them down that you'll feel a physiological experience. There will be something in you when you call forth, what do I value the most? What is a non-negotiable for me? And this is going to tell you, between these two lists, what do I need and what are non-negotiables for me in terms of my values. This is where you start to uncover what's actually going on with your boundaries. Where are the boundaries? This is what's going to give you a hint of the boundaries. As I said, they already are there. All that's happened is you haven't called them out or you've ignored them. So when you put those two lists together, the list of what if I was free and allowed to say what I need, and if I was true and honest about what my highest values are, when those lists come together, immediately there you start to see, where are your boundaries? And then, and this is the part that often is the challenge, is how to communicate those boundaries. And again, it's not about setting the boundaries, they are there. It's about choosing to call them out and to share with others what they are. And I always say to people, start with the ones that are not too challenging for you. Get into the habit of this. The brain has wired itself on a hard neurological level. You have pathways that the path of least resistance is people pleasing or saying yes when you should say no. And these things are hardwired into your brain, and brain is an organ that is going to take the path of least resistance in order to conserve energy. So know this, first of all, that your default mode network in the beginning is going to be to either ignore or allow the transgression of the boundary. Communicating it is not going to come out of you immediately. So be be gentle on yourself and work in spaces where it's easier. If you feel safe with boundaries with your spouse, work with your spouse. If it's with your children or your best friend or your family, or maybe you've got some staff where you can start delegating some tasks, to start there and be prepared for the internal backlash. The internal backlash is not the truth. It is partly a a part of us going, this doesn't feel normal. This is not how we're used to doing things. And so we get a whole set of chemicals that start to alert us to, hey, you're going off course here. And it's more about the brain wants to stay on a course that it knows is predictable. And this is the challenge we all face with our brains, is that our brains and bodies will conspire to keep us on the same path because it is perceived to be safer by the system, because it's predictable. That's what the brain wants to do. It wants to predict the next outcome. And this is why we often stay trapped in what looks on the outside to be unhealthy behaviors, so-called self-sabotage behaviors, which is, if you've heard me speak before, you'll know that I say there is no such thing as self-sabotage. It's total baloney. The reason that we engage in behaviors that don't serve us on a repetitive basis is purely because that's how the system has been programmed, and it is a lower energy way of managing things to just go down the known and predictable path. So know this: when you begin to step two, start to communicate these boundaries, there will be an internal backlash. You will experience some form of physiological experience. Maybe you'll notice in your chest or your body, or you'll just the throat, or you'll just start to become aware of anxiety. So the step here is to note it without judgment, to go, there I see is my brain is trying to pull me back to the old way of doing things, which it's trying in a way to protect me, which I now know is not helpful. And so I am going to take charge of this and to simply just observe it and to allow it to go past. The second thing to note is that there may very well be pushback from the outside world for the same reason, really. They are used to the way things were, and nobody likes change. And so change is a challenge for the people on the outside world. And again, what do you do with this? Well, a couple of things can be helpful. One is to notice without judgment and to recognize that that is them. It's not you. You have not done anything to cause that reaction. They are having a reaction. You didn't cause the reaction. Number one. And number two, depending on the relationship, is to share with the person exactly what's happening. So a good example, I've set down working hours, and I don't do meetings on weekends. And now I have a client who is used to me meeting on weekends. Preempt that request and go to them and say, hey, listen, I'm reorganizing my business so that I can offer a better service to my clients. And for that reason, I have implemented working hours. So in future, we can have meetings anytime on Mondays to Fridays, or maybe you've designated meetings days, whatever that is, and communicate that to them. The truth is, the reason you're doing this is so that you can offer them better service. If they then choose that that's not the kind of service provider that they want, that operates at high levels of integrity and high quality service, that's their choice. At least then you know that that client is not a good fit for your values in your business. So explain to people what's behind this, that you haven't suddenly just kind of become a gatekeeper. It's not about that. It's about that you want to be more present. Explain to your children, explain to your family. If you have family dynamics where you have a family member who keeps coming unannounced to your home, to explain to them that this is what's going on, but that you do want to see them, though the parameters for how we have our relationship must change in order that I can show up as the best version of me in that relationship. So in the communication space, no, you'll have resistance internally. There may be resistance from the outside world. And what settles both of those down is to notice without judgment, not take it personally, and with other people communicate the background behind this. And fourthly, then, is consistency. If you are wishy-washy with these boundaries, two things happen. First of all, people start to mistrust you. And they don't know where they stand with you. So your clients will be unsure, your family is unsure. So it causes mistrust in the outside world. It causes mistrust in the inside world. Thirdly, and most importantly, for neuroplasticity to work, we have to be consistent and intentional about the practice. And when the boundaries keep shifting, our internal predictability mechanism and our own neuroplasticity doesn't get affected sufficiently. And we don't build new neural networks where the path of least resistance is to healthy, happy boundaries. In order for you to change your default network to being able to communicate and work within healthy, happy boundaries, it requires that you are consistently communicating and honoring your boundaries, which again, use the first couple of steps to keep yourself there and be aware of the challenges that may come. The last thing I will say is that this is a skill. If you have been historically a people pleaser, I have clients who refer to themselves as recovering people pleasers. It does kind of function like a bit of an addiction. So if you are this person, know that this is a skill. There will be times potentially where you slip up, where you say yes when you should have said no, where you default to people pleasing behavior. It's okay. The important part here is for you to recognize it, go back to your journal and say, hey, look at that. In that moment with that client or with that family member, I didn't communicate effectively what my values and my needs are. It's worth noting what was going on there. What was the fear? What was I afraid of? Anytime we let that slip, it's driven by a fear. So again, not to take it personally if you let it slip, to go back, because that's where the neuroplasticity is going to get activated in the learning space of understanding, oh, hey, hang on a minute, that's what went on there. How do I make sure that the next time that set of circumstances happens, I stay conscious, I stay awake, and I'm aware enough to make the better decision in that moment, insofar as my boundaries are concerned. So I wish you great joy in having healthy boundaries. If you found this valuable, I've got a couple of talks on this. One which will pop up now called "Stop, Don't Be a Doormat," and there's a whole lot of resources on this channel. So subscribe to this channel if you love what I've spoken about today. Every week I produce a new video on a topic that's around women empowerment primarily, though really it doesn't matter if you're a woman or a man. These things are the same. Our brains work the same. So hit the subscribe button. If you loved what I said today, please like it and put some comments in the chat. What was your nugget and how are you getting on with boundaries? Bookmark this and come back to it in a couple of days or a couple of weeks and share with me what exactly have you done differently and how has boundaries started to improve your world. We go into quite a lot of depth in this in my membership program called the Freedom Collective, which you'll find a link for down below. If you want to explore this in depth and start to get actual operational tools for it, then click the link down below and get some more information on the Freedom Collective. We'd love to see you inside there. Have a happy day.